53 years ago, this February, astronaut Edgar Mitchell successfully piloted the lunar module Antares back to the Apollo 14 mothership. And as he gazed out at Earth through the vast expanse of space, a type of universal consciousness and love flowed into him with a force that shook his being. And so to get us into the mood, I'm gonna play this short couple of minute video clip of Edgar Mitchell talking about that experience. And it is really the Savikalpa Samadhi experience that founded IONS.
5, 4, 1, 0. We have ignition.
The story is we were on the way home. My job on the lunar surface was roughly complete, so I had a little more time to look out the window than the other guys did. So every 2 minutes, a picture of the Earth, the Moon, and the Sun would come through the spacecraft window. And in the backdrop of the stars, 10 times as bright as you could ever see from Earth because of the intervening atmosphere that covers our planet. And it was a wow experience, ecstatic, and accompanied by ecstasy just to see this. It was falling in love with nature all over again. See, stars I was seeing out there, and we know that stars are the furnaces that create matter in our universe. And those stars out there had prototyped the matter in my body, and the matter in the bodies of my partners and the spacecraft. And suddenly I was a part of those stars, that we were one, we were all in unity. And suddenly that was very personal. Instead of being an intellectual knowledge, those were my molecules.
Well, I think if you observe what's happening in the culture, people are turning more and more. People are recognizing we have neglected a spiritual dimension in our lives, and that we've been encouraged to do that by a materialistic culture. And so there's quite a significant movement in both Northern Europe and the United States and elsewhere in the world to do something about that. And partly that puts a pressure on science to, especially among younger scientists, to ask this question about consciousness, which ultimately becomes a question about spirit.
Okay, so this talk is dispatched from the revolution, and it's also about how IONS is leading the consciousness revolution of science. So just keep in mind the question, why do I juxtapose these images of the Buddha's enlightenment and the volcano erupting on Jupiter's moon Io? So we'll get to that. So what I'm going to cover in this presentation is really a follow-up on what ION's first president, Willis Harman, his emphasis on leading a revolution of science to include consciousness into our scientific models of how reality works. And that's really, in a sense, the second revolution that follows upon a first revolution in science that is really the mysteries of quantum physics and the transformation of the foundations of science from the classical physics worldview to the quantum physics worldview. And then Harman's revolution of science to include consciousness is the next revolution that we're in now. So this is Willis Harman, who was he was talking to Jeffrey Mishlove when it was Jeffrey Mishlove's, our friend Jeffrey Mishlove's show was on broadcast television, PBS, and 1994, talking about this revolution of science to include consciousness into our scientific models of how reality works and how that is at the foundation, at the center of IONS' mission. And that also happened to be 1994, the first year of the Tucson Science of Consciousness conferences, which were founded by Stuart Hameroff and David Chalmers. And Stuart Hameroff is now our good friend at IONS, and we're in process of collaborating with Stuart. So there's another circle of connections there. And I'm trying to advance this slide. There we go. So key takeaways from this talk. So I gave a talk a lot like this, similar to this, at the Parapsychology Association convention, annual convention in Merida, Mexico, a couple of months ago. And I started out with takeaways from this talk. So if you fall asleep following this, you're not going to fall asleep. It's going to be very exciting. But the key takeaways are right up front here. And that's this: modern physics opens to the possibility of a lot of parapsychology. Modern physics really opens us to the possibility of a lot of parapsychology. So I'm going to explain what that really means. And then also, parapsychologists, however, have bought into a sort of a dogma being that the physical universe is causally closed. And that buying into that dogma, which is from the old classical physics paradigm, is what hampers advancement of the field and integration of the whole field of psi research with the rest of science. So modern physics is not causally closed, however. So I'm going to get into a little bit of what that means. And science leaders like Roger Penrose, who's a leader in the field of science of consciousness, they are tapping into this fact that modern quantum physics is not causally closed. And that leaves us an opening to bring into the next revolutionary view of science, the consciousness aspect of reality. And to do this, we need to engage in disruptive science and be bold enough to address the ontological problem that's holding back this integration of the field of psi research with the rest of the scientific world. So why does science need a revolution to understand consciousness? Why does science need a revolution? So because the neurons only, physicalist only approach, which still dominates the field of science of consciousness, it fails to address the hard problem of qualia. The hard problem of qualia. That really just means the problem of explaining how we have the experience of existence, how we have the experience of being. And the neurons only, physicalist only approach, it fails to address the problem of agency, how consciousness can act in the world. It's not possible to address that in the neurons only, physicalist only approach. And it is incompatible with all of the tremendous amount of data and publications we have now about non-local consciousness and psi phenomena acting in the world. And that's inclusive of the whole field of near-death experiences, as well as psi phenomena and actual death experiences as well. And it's incompatible with all the religious, esoteric, developmental data, and like the kind of Savikapa Samadhi experience that Edgar Mitchell had, that is the founding of IONS. So I'm going to talk about this model on the right there of as suggests that it's the best meta-ontology of reality, and it comes from Roger Penrose. So Roger Penrose, a Nobel Prize physics winner. His 1994 book, Shadows of the Mind, which is a follow-up to his earlier book, The Emperor's New Mind. And he presents this three domains view of reality, where you have on the right the physical world, and on the left the mental world, and on the top the Platonic world. And all these are domains of reality. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on that, so we have an orientation, because I'm going to use this simplified chart going forward to help organize our thinking. And so what is the physical world on the right? The physical world on the right in this diagram, it's the objective physical domain of reality. It's everything empirical, everything measurable, everything that is described by modern physics, chemistry, biology, etc. Okay, and then on the lower left, you have the subjective domain of reality. The subjective domain of reality is the domain of qualia, thoughts, feelings, sensations, the experience of being, the experience of existence, all the experience, all the phenomenal world operates with respect to that domain. And then the Platonic domain. What is the Platonic domain? Well, it's also an objective domain of reality. It's not a subjective domain. It's not created by our thoughts, and we don't experience it. But it's just like the physical world. We don't experience directly. We experience our mental construct of the physical world. We don't experience directly the Platonic world, and it's also not empirically measurable. But on this view of reality, it does have a fundamental existence. So you can use that three worlds diagram to get a sense of all of the spectrum of meta-ontologies of consciousness. So on the left there, you have the idealism, the idealist view of consciousness, the idealist view of reality, really, where you have the only fundamental existence is given to the mental world, the subjective world, out of which precipitates the physical world and maybe the Platonic world. And then on the right, you have the physicalist worldview, the physicalist ontology of reality, where the only thing that's thought of as real is the physical world, and the other worlds are somehow precipitated out of the physical world only. And then right in the middle, you have the just right, the Goldilocks version, and Roger Penrose's version, where you have the Platonic world, the physical world, the mental world all have fundamental existence. They're not reducible. None of them are reducible to the others, and that's also consistent with dual aspect monism, which is really popular these days as well. So this is the view we're going forward with in this talk. So what's the evidence for the existence of the Platonic domain of reality? If it's not empirical, you can't measure it. What's the evidence that it exists? Well, you have all the esoteric, religious, experiential evidence, and now that's kind of indirect because anything that you experience is subjective domain of reality. But on this view, there is ways to get insight into the existence of the Platonic domain and the occult magical traditions, and also all the psi experiments, modern psi experimental evidence, Dean Radin's evidence, and many of the IONS research over the past 50 years is evidence of the existence of that domain of reality, and also modern science of consciousness experiments as well, like the whole Hameroff and Penrose, I mentioned Roger Penrose's view, orchestrated objective reduction model of how consciousness works in the world is dependent on the Platonic domain operating together with the physical and the mental domain. And then the others are, now we have lots of meta-theoretical constructs, frameworks, in which how this can work, or at least overviews, like overview level structures of meta theories of how this can work. And that was what our recent 2024 Lyndon G. O'Brien Prize was for the best essays, papers about the reviews of the theories of non-local consciousness. So from the world of religion, if we go back to 1893, the first modern great Indian yogi, Swami Vivekananda, came to the West, the 1893 World Parliament of Religions in Chicago, and he kind of stole the show there. And he was really popular in the U.S. for a brief time, and he's written up in the New York Times and all the newspapers, and he did a speaking tour of the U.S. and England, and he was bringing the ancient Vedic ontology of reality, as well as this fundamental view of what reality is, to the world, and it was very popular. And that Vedic view is where you have an Atman, oversoul, a unitary, non-dual aspect. Well, the universe the universal non-dual aspect that precipitates out separated souls in space and time. And those separated souls operate in the mind consciousness aspect of reality, and the body brain action and perception aspects. And that's the world of Maya in the Vedantic terminology, which is really the world of science. And so that precipitated down there. But the problem was, even though it was popular view at the time, in the 1890s world, the scientific world was governed by pre-modern views of physics. That's classical physics. And in the classical physics worldview, if that is everything about how reality works, the physical cannot be causally connected to the world of consciousness. So that Vedantic view of how reality works just was not consistent with the classical physics view of reality at the time. So then the solution came, even though we're still trying to understand that it is the solution, that the solution possibility came about in the 1920s when modern physics became the foundational science of, at the foundations of science. And modern physics is based in quantum physics. And in quantum physics, there's an opening in the causal structure of the physical universe that allows for this type of reunification with Vedantic-like views of ontology. And really all of the esoteric spiritual traditions also had a similar view and have a similar view of reality like that. So these developments of moving to modern physics, they open up that new possibility. Quantum physics does not explain it, but it opens up the possibility of potentially explaining it going forward. So for another example in the current world is artificial intelligence, right? So in March of 2016, the robot AlphaGo crushed the best human professional Go player of all time. And Go is a much more complex, much more difficult game than chess. And chess was beaten by computers long ago. Go requires a whole new level of thinking to beat. Some of us who play Go as a hobby used to hope that even though the computers beat the best chess players, they would never beat the Go players because there's a kind of beauty involved in Go. But they did. AlphaGo beat the best human Go players of all time. And so it's obviously domain smart. It's extremely smart. But AlphaGo, is it conscious? On this view, and Penrose says this too, on this view, it would not be conscious, but it is really smart. It's really good, and it does pass a kind of Turing test. But because it's a classical computing Turing machine, it will not be conscious on this view. Possible future quantum computing AI could plausibly become conscious on this view. And so we'll go forward a little bit, understanding why we would say that. And by the way, we at IONS were talking about what's going to be the next topic for the Lindsay G. O'Brien Annual Prize competition. And we were talking about possibly, no, this is not, I'm just mentioning that we're talking about possibly a topic along these lines. So what would be the ontology of a machine artificial intelligence consciousness? Well, presumably it would be the same ontology as biological intelligence consciousness works. And on this view, it would be the esoteric Vedantic type of approach, or the Platonic model, like Penrose's approach, integrated with modern physics. And it would just be a machine type of instantiation of that, which could be a completely different kind of consciousness. So Hart McNevin, our friend at Google, he is leading a group that includes Christoph Koch and others that is actually trying to test that hypothesis that quantum processes are the linchpin that allow consciousness to operate in biological matter, and they're, in simplistic terms, they're actually project is to connect human brains eventually, starting with organelles, with quantum computing chips as a way of measuring does the awareness of the brain change when it has this expanded quantum field that it's operating in. So these experiments are beginning to test those arrows in that three-domain world diagram of how reality works. And so they're starting to test for those other domains of reality. And then also, of course, all the IONS research, including Dean Radin's research and on the quantum optical systems. And now there's another researcher, Santos Helikar, who's doing some related experiments that are starting to validate in a different way, from a different direction, what Dean Radin and others doing quantum optical type, micro PK type research are doing. And that starts to give us evidence of the existence of non-physical aspect of reality. And this is from a paper that Dean has submitted, so we can't go into details, but it's starting to test the existence of these other domains of reality even more robustly than have been tested before. And then there's a whole model of the whole Roger Penrose, Stuart Hameroff orchestrated objective reduction model of how consciousness operates in biology, involving microtubules, just because microtubules are the kind of biological molecules that Penrose and Hameroff and others say and are starting to experimentally show now can set up entangled and superposed quantum states that go through sequence of collapses on biological timescales. And on this model, those quantum wave function collapses of the microtubule structures are the moments of consciousness. And we at IONS are now very recently partnering, collaborating with Stuart Hameroff to do a project to test this model indirectly by using transcranial ultrasound to treat and pilot projects to see if transcranial ultrasound applied to the brain can help treat things like early stage Alzheimer's disease. And the theory of how that works, if it does work, and we'll find out through the project if it does work, is this model, which is inclusive of and connected to non-local consciousness and the Platonic domain of reality. There are other experiments testing Hameroff-Penrose or approach, anesthesia itself, which is, Hameroff is an anesthesiologist, and that's how he got into this whole thing, is reputed to act in, through this model of how microtubules connect with quantum aspect of reality in the brain. And there's experiment under the mountains in Italy. A high energy physics laboratory did a little experiment to test whether the Penrose type quantum gravity collapse, which is the part of this model that connects with the Platonic aspect of reality, whether it really happens. And Anirban Bhattacharya, our friend, is doing nano biotechnology experiments to show that microtubule molecules are capable of acting in this way. So these experiments are underway. And there are also a category of experiments very closely related to the quantum optical, microphysical, micro PK experiments that we are doing that can be thought of as testing the now recently popular simulation theory of reality. That reality is a simulation. The ways you can test that simulation theory are really, you can look at as tests of the existence of a Platonic domain of reality, and the existence of a fundamentally existing mental domain of reality together with the platonic domain that interact with the physical domain to manifest the actual physical reality. So also, we at IONS, we're in process of applying to be a part of a major application to National Science Foundation, Science and Technology Center's Integrated Partnerships program led by our collaborator, our friend Dante Loretta at the University of Arizona. That's being called, the theme of this approach is Arizona Quantum Biology Initiative. And this proposal that we're working on, and we're working on getting IONS accepted to be a part of the proposal. So this is just a preview. It focuses on the emerging field of quantum biology and exploring how quantum phenomena may fundamentally influence biological processes in life's adaptability. So that's a sort of National Science Foundation acceptable way of saying this, that it's a whole experimental project involving multiple centers, IONS, University of Arizona, Google is part of it, and 4 other centers to test this quantum biological fundamental connection of biophysical reality to what I'm calling the platonic domain of reality, and what Penrose calls as well. So we also have all the evidence from meditation and spiritual esoteric practices, which we can look at as like experiments. They're like internal experiments measuring the existence of the other domains of reality. So here's a little bit on the physics foundation. The physics foundation is what I was talking about there. And so this is a kind of busy slide, but just focus in on the graphic, the view. So you have, this is a depiction of what's current, modern, and has been for many decades, textbook quantum physics view of how a system works. And it advanced by itself, not we're back. And that is in quantum physics, this is just textbook ordinary standard quantum physics. You have a system is evolved, any quantum system, physics system is governed by the Schrodinger equation, which describes how a wave function changes in time. And that's a deterministic, it's a deterministic equation, deterministic like classical physics was deterministic, but it's deterministic about how the wave evolves in time. And then any actual observation of reality, anything that's actually measured empirically that actually happens in reality, is when that wave, which is a probability distribution of what will actually be observed, collapses to an actual observation. So that collapse is a non-algorithmic, as a non-computational, as Roger Penrose says, event, and it's not part of modern physics. Physics doesn't tell us anything about why it collapses to one outcome versus another outcome. Physics tells us very deterministically exactly how the wave function evolves in time, but this event that actually precipitates any physical reality event, which is the collapse to a particular observation, is not part of physics, and that's the opening to something beyond physics. So, pop quiz. How do 2 particles become quantum entangled? Question 1. And how does a system enter into a state of quantum superposition? Who, I wish I could see people. Who knows the answer to this? I don't have time to go into the chat right now, but this is, I'm doing it this way because it took me a long time to understand, appreciate that the answers to these questions are very simple. You know, we tend to think, oh, quantum physics is very complicated mathematics. How do I figure out the mathematics to do these things? It's very simple. And so the answer to question, how does a system enter into a state of superposition, quantum superposition, is that basically any state, when you're not observing it, is in a state of quantum superposition multiple outcomes microphysically until you make a measurement, and then it collapses to a particular outcome. And then the answer to how do two particles become entangled is also very simple. Any two particles that are encounter each other in any way microphysically, that is, in an unobserved microphysical way, between observations, they become entangled. So everything around us is entangling and in superposition all the time until observations or environmental decoherence quantum collapses them. So remember that physics doesn't tell us anything about the collapse of the wave function, about the particular outcome of a unique event. It only tells us about the quantum wave function distribution and how that evolves in time. So the question here is conscious experience of being, in other words, our experience of existence or reality, is it actually a series of unique events that physics, modern physics, doesn't tell us anything about? It only tells us about the probabilities of possible future events. Like, for example, a world record pole vault is a unique event, or any transcendental music experience is a unique event, or any, in a sense, any human experience of reality is always a unique event. We here in this webinar will never recreate this exact experience. And so the quantum physics view of only talking about statistical ensembles of identical quantum events and nothing about unique events is the rub. And that's also the opening for an entirely additional aspect of reality to tell us how to integrate consciousness into our scientific models of how reality works. So we need a theory of what actually happens. This requires adding new properties of processes to the simple quantum physics model of reality. And this procedure on this view can be seen as a generalization of the Wigner von Neumann. Gene Wigner and John von Neumann were two of the founders of quantum physics back almost 100 years ago. They had a theory, they had an approach in which a conscious property instantiates experience of being and actually does something in the quantum wave function collapse process. So we can pick that up now, and there are others taking this approach now. And so we have to postulate new properties. We could call the new properties something like noetic charges that emanate noetic fields. And these noetic fields then instantiate experience of being and generate conscious agency. They play a causal role, but only in the quantum wave function collapse outcomes on this view. So there's a history of introduction of new properties into science, into physics. It goes back to the very well-known Isaac Newton introduced the property of universal gravitational mass that's acted upon by the force of gravity in 1687. James Clerk Maxwell introduced the property of electric charge that's acted on by electromagnetic forces in 1862. And then quantum mechanics about 1925, the whole wave nature of matter that we were just describing. It's not a new property, but it's a whole new aspect of reality. And the property of spin angular momentum, which is a quantum property in 1925. And then more recently, in the 1970s, properties like the flavor charge and color charge that act on by the nuclear forces. These were all successful introductions of new properties into our physics and scientific models of reality. And also recently, we have the whole dark energy and dark matter postulates, which are also related to observations, where most of the universe is we don't know what it is yet. But that's just another aspect. So why can't we connect with this opening in the causal structure of reality and propose a new property now? Something like noetic charge. Noetic charges that generate noetic fields, which are an ontic property of matter. Ontic means they exist. They fundamentally exist. A property of matter that instantiates experience of being. Not involved in any forces, but only involved in the quantum wave function collapse process. So what do these proposed hypothetical noetic fields do? Well, they generate experience of being. This is a model. This is a meta-theoretical concept. Generate experience of being. They instantiate conscious causation. They are the Platonic domain of reality. They are the acupuncture chi system of traditional Chinese medicine, for example, and other systems, like the chakra nadi system of traditional Indian Ayurvedic medicine, and the non-physical entities and aspects in all the esoteric spiritual traditions too. So on this view, the physical structure constrains the functional possibilities, and the noetic fields supply unity and continuity of experience. And I suggest this is why people like Niels Bohr, who was one of the primary physicists who founded quantum physics about 100 years ago, why he and others said things like, there's a perfectly good place for metaphysics. Once quantum physics was instantiated as the fundamental physics, that creates this whole opening for perfectly good place for metaphysics now. Whereas before, in the classical physics worldview, there was not an opening there was no good place for metaphysics. And so on this new view, you can start to make sense of things like this painting by Alex Gray about that shows conceptually the physical body together with the mechanical chemical systems of the body together with the non-physical body. It's like the consciousness aspect of the body, the chakra nadi system, and the acupuncture meridian systems. So, however, the luminaries in this field of modern quantum physics and what it means, they have warned us that when we get to this new view, it will be strange, amazing, and wonderful. John Bell, who was famous for the Bell inequality that tested for that showed us how to test for the actual existence of entanglement, and what Einstein called spooky action at a distance. That was all enabled to be tested by John Bell's Bell inequality. And by the way, the 2022 Nobel Prize was given for those tests and theoretical understanding of what those tests mean. Bell said, this new view will require an imaginative leap that will astonish us. And one of the winners of that 2022 Nobel Prize, Anton Zeilinger, he said, not after he won the prize, but decades ago, in an interview, he said something like, this new theory that will finally explain in the future what's going on there, this new theory will be so much stranger than current quantum mechanics that people attacking quantum mechanics now will learn to have it back. So that's a word of warning that this is uncharted territory, but it's where we have to go, we think, to bring consciousness into our scientific models of how reality works. So consciousness, I think we can look at the ontology of consciousness, that it is the most important unsolved problem in science today. And when we finally venture in there and develop this entirely new view or expanded view of reality, how reality works, that include consciousness into our models of how reality works, I think analogously will be like the planetary encounters. I had the privilege to, as in graduate school as a postdoc, to be a part of the unmanned space program and part of a team that had an instrument aboard the Voyager 2 spacecraft. The Voyager 2 went past the outer planets, investigated close up the outer planets of our solar system for the first time ever. And every time Voyager 2 came by a new planet, it was called a planetary encounter. It was a huge event. And we scientists always learned amazing new whole categories of phenomena that were not even imagined before, because when you see these planets and their moons from the Earth, they're just points of light. And so before we were able to go there and investigate, people would speculate like, oh, Neptune is so cold. There's nothing happening there. It's just a point of light. There can't even be weather. It's because it's so cold, so far away from the sun. But then you get there and you find out it has weather systems and even a great dark spot like Jupiter's great red spot. And the moons of Neptune, moons of all the outer planets, have tremendous geology, things you never imagined. And there was a volcano on the Jupiter's moon Io, observed by Voyager. This is from a later spacecraft. Voyager didn't have that level of detail, but those kind of things were always observed in the planetary encounters. I think when we get into our new view of reality that will include the consciousness domain of reality, the platonic domain of reality, together with our physical domain of reality, we'll have multiple metaphorical planetary encounters like that. We'll encounter whole new domains of reality.
I love that. I want to just pop in really quick to let everyone know we have some Q&A time in like 3 or 4 minutes. And so put your questions in, and so exciting. I'll pass it back to you. Just wanted to let you know. Go ahead,
Thanks,
Thomas.
Andrea. That's perfect time because I am about to close up. However, just this Wednesday, 2 days ago, there was another congressional hearing about the UAP phenomenon, disclosure, and there was a former NASA Associate Administrator for Space Policy and Partnerships, who was a part of a NASA independent study group on the UAP phenomenon. Mr. Gold, Michael Gold, he was one of the witnesses. And I noticed that he said the following at that congressional hearing just this Wednesday. Members of the NASA UAP independent study team that he was on, particularly those in academia, were mocked and even threatened to have the temerity to engage in study of UAP. Our best tool for unlocking the mystery of UAP is science, but we can't conduct a proper inquiry if the stigma is so overwhelming that just daring to be a part of a NASA research team elicits such a response. Therefore, one of the most important actions that can be taken relative to exposing the truth of UAP is to combat the stigma. Okay, I'm mentioning this quote that was just the other day about the stigma, to emphasis on the stigma. And it might seem like, okay, I'm jumping to UAP from consciousness, science of consciousness, but actually, probably, in order to finally understand what's going on with UAP phenomenon, we're going to have to understand consciousness, because what consciousness is and how consciousness operates in reality, because that's probably at the foundations of what's going on in UAP as well. But I want to focus on the stigma here. So like Michael Gold said, there's still a huge stigma to studying these topics. And I think we can generalize from studying UAP, because you could replace UAP with science of consciousness here. And there's a similar stigma to studying the science of consciousness. Why? Why is there that stigma? Well, is it a collective trauma response, possibly? I think that may be one of the answers. So, for example, maybe this all connects back to, in some way, partly, the Council of Trent in the mid-1550s, mid-1500s. The Council of Trent, okay, what did they do at the Council of Trent? Well, they did promote science, but strictly only science relegated only to the material realm. And they emphasized the death penalty for heresy, which at the time, any science of consciousness would be a heresy. And they condemned the Copernican heliocentric view of reality, view of the solar system as heretical. They denounced Galileo. And Galileo, he was quite aware of this death penalty, and so he recanted, and so that he could live in house arrest instead of being killed. And but others like Giordano Bruno did not recant. Bruno was burned alive at the stake, naked in a public square. So in Rome, and for what? For claiming the existence of other planets, for believing in reincarnation, for dealing in magic and divination. Those were listed specifically, as well as general heresy. So that's a very traumatic event. And so maybe there's a kind of a collective trauma that feeds into why there's a stigma still against scientists, young scientists, any scientists, even today, venturing into these realms to finally try and integrate the spiritual consciousness aspect of reality with the physical aspect of reality, scientifically. So, summary of this talk: the foundations of science are ripe to finally, after 500 years, address consciousness inside our whole experience of the world, including consciousness into our scientific models of how reality works, will be a second scientific revolution and usher in a new age for humanity. IONS is poised to lead in this area via collaborations, some of which I mentioned, and continuing the wonderful experimental results that IONS has been doing for 50 years, and also scientific meta frameworks like this talk that help us interpret and understand in a way that can be communicated with the rest of the scientific community and integrate this approach with the rest of the scientific and academic worlds, and also IONS through inspiring and sharing with the public on a broad scale. So join the revolution and join the Institute of Noetic Sciences. We have some time for questions. I think I should stop sharing screen. Is that right, Andrea?
That is right. Excellent. Thank you so much, Thomas. We see some nice hearts and hands coming together. Thank you for that amazing overview and depth that you provided. We have some great questions coming on in. So, first, Caitlin is asking, can a noetic field be explained by the science of 0 point energy or vice versa?
Well, that's a good question. And there are proposals in that direction. So possibly, right? So I'm presenting here a kind of a meta-theoretical overview that would include that type of explanatory approach as well, but I wouldn't want to collapse it to only that explanatory possibility.
Excellent. Thank you. We've got a question from Rhonda, and I'll summarize a little bit, but in essence, how do we move people toward a greater openness to this important area of science when resistance comes up and shifting people's fundamental beliefs? She says, not easy to do. So, what would you recommend?
Um, I think we need a multi-day conference to talk about that question. But there's many pronged approaches. So it is sort of, the question is sort of how do we remove the stigma from scientists thinking there's a stigma to working in this field. And one way is increased funding, or prizes like our IONS, Linda G. O'Brien Prize, and collaborations, bringing more organizations into the fold so that scientists working in the field can see, well, there is ways to maintain your scientific integrity and to not burn your card, if there were such a thing as a card-holding scientist card, and just create more opportunities for young scientists in the field, and scientists, and don't engage in the stigma.
Great. And this question is related, but it says, what role do you believe the general public can play in this scientific revolution? So, not scientists, but just general public. How might people be involved in this kind of scientific revolution?
Well, there's not really a split between the general public and the scientific community on this view. So, um, uh, so okay, don't be afraid of science, and don't be afraid of engaging with the conversation and engaging with your own experience of reality. So what this is really doing in a way is just incorporating our whole experience of reality as humans into an understanding of science that can include all of our experience of reality, because the current, well, the largely still popular materialist physicalist view of science can't incorporate much of what we actually experience of the world.
Right. Excellent. Including all of our experience. Absolutely. And we have a couple of specific questions. One from Jeff. I think as you were talking about quantum entanglement, he asked, do particles replicate themselves? If so, would it imply particles that are duplicates of each other would be quantumly entangled?
Uh, any any particles that microphysically interact become quantum entangled. And certainly, if there's like a nuclear reaction that spits out two particles from one system, they'll be definitely quantum entangled until they are measured or environmental decohered. And things are microphysically entangling in the environment around us in the wild all the time. Basically everything microphysical between collapses of, of the quantum wave function collapses is entangling all the time.
Absolutely. And we have a question from Ashwati who says, how can I be part of this study or any studies as part of noetic science? I think that's a nice way for people to get involved. I don't know if you want to say something else, but we can send out links to any of our live experiments that you all can also be a part of. But
Yes, yeah, we have links on the IONS website that are for it, that say, okay, tell us, fill out your info here if you want to be a part of our experiments, right? So that's a way. Start with those links and get on the IONS newsletter list and the IONS mailing list so that you get announcements. The science team is often looking for study participants of various types. So that's one way.
yeah, and Ashwati said, I'm in Kuwait, but you can we have some online studies and in-person studies and all of the above. So as long as you have an internet connection, you can definitely look at our studies. We'll send out a link to everyone. So that's great.
Yeah,
And
we do a lot of online studies now.
yeah, and I can hardly believe we're coming to the top of the hour, but I want to give you a chance, Thomas, just for any overall closing comments after our presentation and Q&A. So I'll pass it back to you for any closing comments.
Well, thanks everybody for us being together today. And I think that was a great question to end on. And I think Andrew's answer and my answer, connect with IONS is the way to connect, one way to connect with this, and also support not just IONS, but any entity, any scientist, any university or laboratory that is doing this enterprise. Support the whole field and IONS, of course.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. It's such an inspiration. And I can see in the chat, and people are also really just excited to be a part of this movement and what it will take to take the next step. So just really appreciate your presentation, Thomas, everyone's questions and comments. Thank you, everyone, for being with us today. And yeah, we hope you stay connected with IONS and with this bigger revolution of bringing consciousness into science. So thank you again. And as many of you know, IONS free programs, as well as our scientific research, are almost entirely funded by generous gifts from our members and donors. So huge gratitude to everyone who supports the mission of IONS. And if you have enjoyed today's offering, we invite you to go to noetic.org/give to make a gift, a special gift, or become a member today if you're not already, and participate in more Noetic events, both online and in person. We can't wait to see you at the next one. So thanks again, Thomas. Thank you, everyone. And until soon. Bye for now.
Thank you.